All right, change the setting here. So I'm going to pick up where I left off. I started to mention, so I'm reading some of my favorite poems from my intro to lit class back in like 1997 or 98. I stumbled upon this textbook. And I used to sit around reading this book in my college dorm back when I didn't have a cell phone or cable TV or anything like that. So it was just, let's just find some good things to read. So there's some really great pieces in here. Anyways, so this is On Reading Poems to a Senior Class at South High by D.C. Barry. Before I opened my mouth, I noticed them sitting there as orderly as frozen fish in a package. Slowly, water began to fill the room, though I did not notice it till it reached my ears. And then I heard the sounds of fish in an aquarium, and I knew that though I had tried to drown them with my words, that they had only opened up like gills for them and let me in. Together we swam around the room like 30 tails whacking words till the bell rang, puncturing a hole in the door where we all leaked out. They went to another class, I suppose, and I home, where Queen Elizabeth, my cat, met me and licked my fins till they were hands again. Oh, I love that poem. It's so good. It's so good. Elizabeth Barrett Browning. When I think of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, I think of Roger Rabbit. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. 1,000, 1,000. So this is one of her incredible love sonnets. If you don't know her story, forbidden love and beautiful poetry, tragic life, but beautiful, beautiful marriage and story. And there's actually a Robert and Elizabeth Barrett Browning museum in Waco, down by Baylor. She writes, if thou must love me, let it be for naught except for love's sake only. Do not say I love her for her smile, her look, her way of speaking gently. For a trick of thought that falls in well with mine, and certes brought a sense of pleasant ease on such a day. For these things in themselves, beloved, may be changed or changed for thee. And love so wrought may be unwrought so. Neither love me for thine own dear pities wiping my cheeks dry. A creature might forget to weep, who bore thy comfort long, and lose thy love whereby. But love me for love's sake, that evermore thou mayest love on through love's eternity. Don't love me out of pity. Don't love me because of my appearance. Love me for love's sake, and our love will never die. Cannot discuss poetry without reading Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Kubla Khan, which was most likely a drug-induced dream. And when he woke up, he tried to write it down, and then a preacher came and knocked on his door and distracted him. And by the time he sat down, he'd forgotten most of the dream. In Xanadu to Kubla Khan, a stately pleasure dome decree, where off the sacred river ran, through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground with walls and towers were girdled round, and here were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree. And here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. But oh, that deep romantic chasm which slanted down the green hill athwart a cedarn cavern. A savage place, as holy and enchanted as ere beneath a waning moon was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover. And from this chasm with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced, amid whose swift half-intermittent burst huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, or chaffy grain beneath the thresher's flail. Amid these dancing rocks at once and ever it flung up momently the sacred river. 5 miles meandering with a mazy motion through wood and dale the sacred river ran, then reached the caverns measureless to man and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. And mid this tumult, Kubla heard from afar ancestral voices prophesying war. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountain and the caves. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. A damsel with a dulcimer in a vision once I saw. It was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abora. Could I revive within me her symphony and song, to such a deep delight 'twould win me, that with music loud and long I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, beware, beware, his flashing eyes, his floating hair. Weave a circle round him thrice, and close thy eyes with holy dread, for he on honey dew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise. Another Emily Dickinson poem. If you don't know Emily Dickinson's rhythm and meter, her poems can almost all be read to the Battle Hymn Republic or to the Yellow Rose of Texas. I'm not going to do that, but now that I've said it, it's going to be hard to not. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but ourselves and immortality. He slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of grazing grain. We passed the setting sun, or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. So much in that poem. Death's civility. Gossamer my gown. And then he brings you to the house that seemed a swelling of the ground like a freshly dug grave. It's been centuries. Oh, it's such a good poem. Okay, this is a poem called Ending by Gavin Ewart, or Ewart. The love we thought would never stop now cools like a congealing chop. The kisses that were hot as curry are bird pecks taken in a hurry. The hands that held electric charges now lie inert as four moored barges. The feet that ran to meet a date are running slow and running late. The eyes that shone and seldom shut are victims of a power cut. The parts that then transmitted joy are now reserved and cold and coy. Romance, expected once to stay, has left a note saying, gone away. Okay, here's a poem called Blackberry Eating by Galway Kinnell. I love to go out in late September among fat, overripe, icy blackberries, to eat blackberries for breakfast, the stalks very prickly, a penalty they earn for knowing the black art of blackberry making. And as I stand among them, lifting the stalks to my mouth, the ripest berries fall almost unbidden to my tongue, as words sometimes do. Certain peculiar words like strengths or squinched. Many-lettered one-syllable lumps which I squeeze, squinch open, and splurge well in the silent, startled, icy black language of blackberry eating in late September. Oh, the imagery in that poem. That's the thing about poetry is it's just, like I said before, you just take all these words from like a prose or a novel, and you condense them down like Campbell's soup and make each word powerful and poignant and pungent. All the P's. Okay, trigger warning, Richard Cory. This one has a trigger warning for suicide ideation. I'll just say. Richard Cory by Edwin Arlington Robinson. Whenever Richard Cory went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from soul to crown, clean-favored and imperially slim. And he was always quietly arrayed, and he was always human when he talked. But still he fluttered pulses when he said, good morning, and he glittered when he walked. And he was rich, yes, richer than a king, and admirably schooled in every grace. In fine, we thought that he was everything to make us wish that we were in his place. So on we worked and waited for the light and went without the meat and cursed the bread. And Richard Cory, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head. Why I'm going to read a poem with suicidal that mentions suicide? Because you never know what's going on inside somebody's heart. You never know what's going on inside somebody's life. Oftentimes we envy and we desire, we want, we covet the lives of other people, not knowing the pain that they may carry with them, the sorrow they may carry with them, the longing, the emptiness. But just in poetry structure, this poem is so elegant and highfalutin. Like, it's just this beautiful image of this incredible man. And then the last few lines are just, it's like, da 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 da. Like, it just kind of throws you into the end, which is what death and suicide both do. Okay, I'm going to take a risk and read a poem out loud that I've never even read to myself, but I just saw who the poet was, and it's my friend Melissa's favorite poet, Theodore Roethke. I'm nervous about this one because some of his poems are kind of crass. Okay. I knew a woman, lovely in her bones, when small birds sighed, she would sigh back at them. Ah, when she moved more ways than one. The shapes a bright container can contain. Of her choice virtues only gods could speak, or English poets who grew up on Greek. I'd have them sing in chorus, cheek to cheek. How well her wishes went. She stroked my chin. She taught me turn and counter-turn and stand. She taught me touch, that undulant white skin. I nibbled meekly from her proffered hand. She was the sickle, I, poor I, the rake, coming behind her for the pretty sake. But what prodigious mowing we did make. Love's like a gander and adores a goose. Her full lips pursed, the errant note to seize. She played it quick, she played it light and loose. My eyes, they dazzled at her flowing knees. Her several parts could keep a pure repose, or one hip quiver with a mobile nose. She moved in circles, and those circles moved. Let seed be grass, and grass turn into hay. I'm martyr to emotion, not my own. What's freedom for? To know eternity? I swear she cast a shadow white as stone. But who would count eternity in days? These old bones live to learn her wanton ways. I measure time by how a body sways. I'm going to read a poem that's a little controversial. It's called The Whipping. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to read this one or not. It's by Robert Hayden. He's the one that wrote Those Winter Sundays that I read the other day. The old woman across the way is whipping the boy again and shouting to the neighborhood her goodness and his wrongs. Wildly he crashes through elephant ears, pleads in dusty zinnias, while she, in spite of crippling fat, pursues and corners him. She strikes and strikes the shrilly circling boy till a stick breaks in her hand. His tears are rainy weather to wound like memories. My head gripped in bony vice of knees, the writhing struggle to wrench free. The blows, the fear worse than blows that hateful words could bring. The face that I no longer knew or loved. Well, it is over now. It is over, and the boy sobs in his room, and the woman leans muttering against a tree, exhausted, purged, avenged in part for lifelong hidings she has had to bear. God, the speaker in this poem is watching this beating happening to a child across the way and throws him back into the trauma of his own childhood and his own abuse, but also speaks to the abuse that this woman had in her childhood that she's now taking out on her child. Robert Hayden was just a mastercraft writer when it came to excuse me, imagery and emotion and such. Another one of my favorite poems I discovered in this class is The Ballad of Birmingham, on the bombing of a church in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963 by Dudley Randall. Mother dear, may I go downtown instead of out to play and march the streets of Birmingham in a freedom march today? No, baby, no, you may not go, for the dogs are fierce and wild, and clubs and hoses, guns and jails aren't good for a little child. But mother, I won't be alone. Other children will go with me and march the streets of Birmingham to make our country free. No, baby, no, you may not go, for I fear those guns will fire, but you may go to church instead and sing in the children's choir. She has combed and brushed her night dark hair and bathed rose petals sweet, and drawn white gloves on her small brown hands and white shoes on her feet. The mother smiled to know her child was in the sacred place, but that smile was the last smile to come upon her face. For when she heard the explosion, her eyes grew wet and wild. She raced through the streets of Birmingham, calling for her child. She clawed through bits of glass and brick, then lifted out a shoe. Oh, here's the shoe my baby wore. But baby, where are you? This is a beautiful poem about tragedy. It's beautiful in the imagery. It's beautiful in the descriptions. It's tragic in the story that it tells. But part of the crafting of this poem is to take a nursery rhyme rhythm and then crash it with the imagery and the harshness of the reality of racism and the civil rights movement and violence. The irony of that the church is the safe place to go as opposed to the freedom marches, and yet the church place is the church is where this child died. I never feel like I do that poem enough justice. All right, I'm going to share one more on this video called Ars Poetica by Archibald MacLeish. A poem should be palpable and mute as a globed fruit, dumb as old medallions to the thumb, silent as the sleeve-worn stone of casement ledges where the moss has grown. A poem should be wordless as the flight of birds. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs, leaving as the moon releases, twig by twig, the night-entangled trees. Leaving as the moon behind the winter leaves, memory by memory, the mind. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs. A poem should be equal to, not true. For all the history of grief, an empty doorway and a maple leaf. For love, the leaning grasses and two lights above the sea. A poem should not mean, but be. Thanks for joining me, guys. Love you dearly. I hope you have a great day.